Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Glad you're here. Happy Thursday. Best day of the week. By the way, we got our special coming up tomorrow. Coronavirus, America at War. I want to start off here with some good news, or positive notes, I should say. And then we're going to end the show on some bad news. But good news first. So saw this on the Twitter, and I thought it was worth sharing. This is from a surgeon. He said there's a lot of bad stuff about being in a hospital right now. Neglecting long-term patients, watching healthy people die in overwhelming numbers, putting yourself at risk, isolating the family, etc. But once you get past that stuff, this is actually an awesome time to be a doctor. We are all getting to do exactly what we've always wanted. Be clinicians and use our judgment. See a problem, solve a problem, tell a friend, watch it catch around the ICU. No administrator asking you to bill for it or what the protocol is. Blank the paperwork, blank the regulations, just do the right thing. And for once, the higher-ups know to step back and let the experts work. You can't believe the energy that you see around the ICUs. Everyone, nurses, doctors, janitors. Real quick, I love the video. I think we played it a couple weeks ago of a group of doctors and nurses applauding the housekeeping custodial staff, which is great, right? There's no hierarchy right now. Like, everyone in the hospital is doing this together. Everyone has an important role to play, and that's exciting. There's like an energy about that. So everyone, nurses, doctors, janitors, are learning, innovating, sharing freely, helping each other. Again, the janitors have such an important role. They always do, but more so now and very obvious. The hierarchy is still there, but it's very much different. One of our junior residents put together this ICU procedure team and did the legwork to make it happen, and now she's functionally my boss. It's a very valuable lesson about leadership, I think. I'm not saying we don't need administrators and higher-ups or rules or regulations. The captain of the ship helps navigate it on a long journey, the scope and length of which is too long for the sailors to contemplate. But in times of crisis, a leader should be a calm voice of honest, candid information and work to support the local experts who know how to keep the ship from capsizing. Don't tell the engine room how to do their job. Let them tell you and then give them the tools. I love that. Have you ever had a moment in your life where it's not that you're busy, right? It's not that you're like just frantically busy. That's not it. But you're doing something so important with urgency to the point where everyone's just clicking on all cylinders. And there's just something organic and smooth. I guess the trendy, like Silicon Valley word for it would be the flow state. Have you heard this before? You're operating in a flow state. It's a very Tim Ferriss kind of word, but a flow state is just maximum focus. And I think the defining characteristic of a flow state isn't just maximum productivity, but it's maximum creativity. And that's what this doctor here, this surgeon was talking about. He's like, we're figuring things out on the fly here. And it doesn't matter who comes up with the idea. It doesn't matter who gets the credit. And you need to be creative in moments like that. And that's exciting. It's fun. And yes, of course, our doctors and nurses and everyone's overwhelmed. Unprecedented for this length of time. But to have moments or entire shifts of flow state, everyone working together without some bureaucrat chiming in, telling you what to do and how to do it, what you can't do, what you must do. Everyone instead just doing what they love. And that's to save lives, pretty important thing. And everyone working for the same mission, whatever it takes, learning at the same time. Like that's a really beautiful thing in the midst of the tragedy of it all. It reminded me of this quote, one of my all-time favorites, from Abigail Adams. She wrote this to her husband. Obviously, this is during the Revolution. These are the times in which a genius would wish to live. It is not in the still calm of life that great characters are formed. The habits of a vigorous mind are formed in contending with difficulties. Great necessities call out great virtues. And when a mind is raised and animated by scenes that engage the heart, then those qualities which would otherwise lay dormant wake into life and form the character of the hero and the statesman. I'm reminded yesterday we talked to that nurse, Kelly, from Michigan, who deployed her 19th deployment with Samaritan's Purse, and she's in Italy. She's been in Italy for a month. And I remember I asked her, I said, why are you there? Why are you doing this? And she gave maybe the most articulate answer to any question I've ever asked in my entire life when it comes to motive. And it's on the YouTube, the first YouTube page. You can watch the whole interview. It was fantastic. But she had some amazing line like, oh, I'm using this, I can't turn away because I have skills that can be used to save people's lives, glorify God, and spread his kingdom. And it was just like no pretense. It was just like, absolute clarity. She's not sitting around bored during a crisis. She's not panicking during this. She's not complaining. She's serving. Yesterday on the show, we also talked about the difference between motion and action. It's really easy to be full of motion during this time and times like this. But she and so many other people are people of action right now. And I'm so grateful for them, and I want some of that, because that's where you get fulfillment. One last piece of perspective. Now, I want to acknowledge up front that this is relevant for half of the population. And I'm going to share it for that half, which I'm a part of. And at the same time, it may be super insulting and lacking empathy for the other half who are in a very terrible and extremely difficult time, whether that's physically sick or death, financially or emotionally, right? So this is a quote for privileged people who are on salary and in good health and big homes. And that's me. Those people, but still complaining about how difficult this time is. I think this perspective is helpful. Let me share it. It's from Mark Manson. He said, when I find myself spiraling emotionally, I remind myself of some basic facts. First, that my grandfather stormed a beach in Italy and watched pretty much everybody with whom he spent the last year die in front of him in a matter of hours. My great uncle at age 19 had to financially support his 3 younger siblings because my great-grandparents could no longer feed all their 6 kids during the Great Depression. A generation before that, the flu pandemic of 1918 ripped through nearly 50 million people worldwide and killed 500,000 in the US, mostly young adults and children. Just a couple generations before that, over 600,000 Americans died fighting over the right for some people to own other people as property. Another generation before that, over 3 million people died because an egomaniacal Frenchman wanted to give everybody the metric system. Heck, the Black Plague in the 14th century killed an estimated 125 million people. That was 20% of the global population. So yeah, I can sit on my couch for a few months. No problem. Now again, there's implications of the economy and blah, blah, yeah, I get all that. But still, I think when it comes to just like, oh, this is so difficult, I think that perspective is really important. Okay. Tomorrow, friendly reminder, we have our special Coronavirus, America at War. We have some amazing guests there, including a Navy SEAL, who will tell us about action, right? We'll turn our frantic worry or whatever motion into action. How to do that, prepare for your family, because things could get worse. Don't know. So that's tomorrow. Coming up next, we're going to talk about the elections in Wisconsin the other day, but also a friendly reminder that China is the enemy. And the WHO, they're no better, might be worse, actually. We'll tell that story next. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. We got to talk about the WHO and how the WHO is to get their stuff together. As one Japanese, their version of a congressman called them the China Health Organization. Trump said in his press conference of the day, he said, we're going to put a hold on money spent to the WHO. We're going to put a very powerful hold on it. And then he kind of walked it back a little bit. But we need to look at that, right? The WHO is the UN. So you got so as much affinity and love as you have for the UN, you should have the same for the WHO. So here's the most important thing. Of all the criticism that the left has for Trump, for not acting soon enough, which is ridiculous, because when Trump did act soon, and we'll get to this in a second, with cutting off flights from China, everyone on the left is like, oh, that's so racist, so horrible, how could you do that, blah, blah. But now all of a sudden they're like, oh, Trump, he didn't act soon enough. All that anger you have at Trump, you need to channel all that to the WHO. This is what Trump tweeted out the other day. He said the WHO really blew it. For some reason, largely funded by the United States, yet very China-centric. We'll get to why in a second. We will be giving a good look. A good look. Fortunately, I rejected their advice on keeping our borders open to China early on. Why did they give us such a faulty recommendation? And you may be thinking, what do you mean faulty recommendation? All right, let's just put the WHO in perspective here. Okay, so we got a bunch of tweets here from the WHO. This is January 14th. Preliminary investigations conducted by the Chinese authorities, there's your first problem, have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of COVID. This is a month, almost like 1 month and a day past the first case of COVID in China. Okay, January 30th. This is straight Chinese propaganda right here. WHO, the speed with which China detected the outbreak, isolated the virus, sequenced the genome, and shared it with the WHO and the world are very impressive. So is China's commitment to transparency and to supporting other countries. What are you kidding me? Commitment to transparency. We have evidence from our intelligence committees, departments, that the death rate in China may be 20, 30 times higher than what they've been telling us. They've been anything but transparent throughout this whole thing. I got some more here. The WHO thanks the Chinese authorities for their commitment to sharing information on the COVID as they continue intensive surveillance and follow-up measures. #China. How about this hack move from the WHO? This is a good one. We would have seen many more cases outside China by now, and probably deaths, if it were not for the Chinese efforts and the progress they've made for their own people and the people of the world. What, are you kidding me? The people of the world? January 10th, WHO advises against the application of any travel or trade restriction on China based on the information currently available. So that's what Trump was talking about. It's a good thing I didn't listen to that advice. Now, when Trump did shut down travel on the 31st, the head of the WHO said that this would have an effect of increasing fear and stigma with little public health benefit. Ooh, we don't want stigma on the people of China with little public health benefit. And now it's a pandemic. This is the head of the WHO. I left China in absolutely no doubt about China's commitment to transparency and to protecting the world's people. February 21st, the measures that China and other countries have taken have given us a fighting chance on retaining the spread of COVID. Come on, what is all this nonsense? The head of the WHO, supported by China, and was supported by China because he promised to follow the one China policy that says Taiwan is a part of China. We played the video before where the Hong Kong reporter, do we have that clip back? Do we have the video of the Hong Kong reporter?
Would the WHO consider Taiwan's membership? Hello?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I couldn't hear your question.
Okay, yeah. Let me repeat the question.
No, that's okay. Let's move to another one then.
Right, because I'm actually curious on talking about Taiwan as well, on Taiwan's case.
We decided to give Dr. Alward another call to follow up.
And I just want to see if you can comment a bit on how Taiwan has done so far in terms of containing the virus.
Well, we've already talked about China, and when you look across all the different areas of China, they've actually all done quite a good job. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for inviting us to participate, and good luck as you go forward with the battle in Hong Kong.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. That's such an unbelievable hack move. The pretending he didn't hear the question. And then she brings it up because just move on. Right? So that's why, right? That is Chinese propaganda right there. I forgot to share this fact here. Niall Ferguson wrote this in a Canadian newspaper. He said on January 23rd, China cut off the Hubei province, that's where Wuhan is, to the rest of China, but they didn't cut it off from the rest of the world. So direct flights continued out, and then Trump's travel restrictions kicked in a week later. So why did China stop flights from Wuhan to the rest of China, but didn't stop flights from Wuhan to, I don't know, northern Italy, which were direct flights every single day nonstop? And then the WHO says, oh, we're doing everything. China did everything they can to stop this from spreading around the world. Right, real quick back on that WHO doctor and Taiwan, not wanting to mention Taiwan. So WHO and the far left and China, they say Taiwan is part of China, right? But then they'll also say the lie that China has no new cases of COVID. Every day they'll come back and be like, oh, no new cases in China, no new cases in China, even though Taiwan has had new cases of COVID. So is Taiwan part of China in that case, or are they not part of China in that case? Read a great line from the National Review that China's influence over the WHO comes at a bargain price, because the U.S. contributes $115 million to the WHO, and that's more than any nation, obviously, and almost 3 times as much as China. Yet they're totally, completely in bed with China. And then they went into full-on social justice mode, and the head of the WHO is talking about how when you talk about COVID, it may have negative meaning for people and fuel stigmatizing attitudes. It's like, guys, or how about this one? This is a good one, too. The WHO tweeted out that health is a fundamental driver for development, and the Belt and Road Initiative can contribute to achieving health for all, or blah, blah, blah. The Belt and Road Initiative is China's global development strategy to spread their influence and power all over the world. Why the heck is the WHO parroting communist propaganda randomly, like for no reason? Like, I want to issue this friendly reminder from time to time. China is the enemy, period. This is a China State news article from March 4th. If China retaliates against the U.S. at this time, in addition to announcing a travel ban on the United States, which they did, it will also announce, this is from the state-run media, in China, it will also announce strategic control over medical products and ban exports to the United States. Then the United States will be caught in the ocean of new coronaviruses. That's swell. Also, according to the US CDC, most of the drugs in the United States are imported. So if China banned exports, the United States will fall into the hell of a new coronavirus pneumonia epidemic. We should rightly say that the US owes China an apology and the world owes China a thank you. They're right. HCQ, which is this medicine that maybe there's some hope could be a nice treatment. We're totally dependent on China for that. 70%. The other day on the radio show, I don't know if we did this on TV, but we talked about Tylenol. The head or someone from Johnson & Johnson issued an official statement that there's going to be Tylenol shortages in different parts of the country for a while. And I remember I read that and I thought, that's interesting. I'm going to do more research on that. I wonder where Tylenol sources their ingredients from, because almost all of this stuff's usually from China, but I wonder if that's the case for Tylenol. Turns out 70% of acetaminophen comes from China. 95% of our ibuprofen comes from China. 45% of penicillin. The last U.S. plant to make penicillin was a Bristol-Myers Squibb plant in Syracuse, New York, that shut down in 2004. National Review did this article. They said we rely on China for 90% of our antibiotics. And for drugs that treat everything from HIV/AIDS to cancer to depression. So they're right. They can just put a chokehold on all of our medicines. And I'm not even mad. I think that's brilliant that they've done that. I'm not mad at them, I should say. Japan just announced this morning, as a part of their stimulus package, $2 billion to help Japanese companies move their manufacturing away from China and back to Japan. Which is great, and we need to do something like that here in America. We got to have that conversation. James Hassan wrote this great tweet the other day. He said, when this is over, the entire world's disposition towards China will be radically different. If nothing else comes out of this, and we can stop handing over our leverage that we've given them the last few decades. That's got to stop. Now, here's the National Review. They said, unspooling supply chains that have developed over the course of the last 2 decades won't be simple. But the U.S. should create every incentive for at least drug companies to move out of China and into other foreign countries and ideally come back here. So I'm as free market of a guy as you could possibly get, right? I don't know, we don't have time here to go over my free market bona fides here, right? But you don't have these relationships with your enemy. We didn't rely on the Nazis to make our tanks and the Japanese to make our ammo. It doesn't make any sense. Why would we rely on the Chinese for anything that's important to us? And I'd say all of our medicine is an important thing. Insane. In conclusion, I like these two tweets right here. Let me pull them up. I like this one from Nassim. We'll start here. It said localism. The higher you go, the more incompetence and recklessness. If this virus ever teaches us anything, it's localism. So the ranking is you, your family, your town, your region, or state. The federal government, that's the CDC. And then above that, you get the UN, which is the WHO. I don't know why anyone would put their hope and faith in the WHO. And then finally, Naval. I'm going to read this backwards. FEMA isn't going to feed you. The FDA is not going to cure you. The CDC isn't going to test you. And the WHO isn't going to warn you. Save yourself. True story. Mike Slater, Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So I don't think we've ever been deluged with as much information ever for such a long period of time, right? I feel like I like fire hoses just fly. I heard a little bit about something with Wisconsin and the Supreme Court, and I like totally dismissed it because I just didn't have time. But I thought, Adam Carrington will know everything about this. Let's talk to the professor and let's take a couple minutes and just talk about that and see what the relevancy and the precedent that this perhaps set. Adam Carrington, of course, a professor at Hillsdale College, stationed in his mahogany library basement, joining us now. Professor, how are you, sir?
I am sheltering in place fairly well. I hope everyone else that has to do that is also.
We are. Well, let's talk about Wisconsin. So I know nothing. So take us to the beginning of the story. What happened?
So Wisconsin had a primary on April 7th, and like a lot of states, since the COVID-19 crisis has sort of developed, they were struggling internally about whether to have it. And there was disagreement between first the legislature and the governor, whether to postpone or not. This is a little different than Ohio that just did postpone. And what finally happened was in the stand down, the legislature wanted to have the primary, and they won over the governor. And so they had it. But what the governor then tried to do, and then what litigants did before a federal court, is say, well, if that's the case, can we extend the deadline for when people will send in their absentee ballots? Because of this, there were more than 1 million additional absentee ballots in the 2020 primary than over the 2016 primary, overwhelmed the local boards of elections. And so they said, can we extend it so that they can basically have an extra week to get it in? And others challenged that. And so all the Supreme Court of the United States really decided was, can they extend that requirement for when absentee ballots are sent in an extra week beyond the election, or they have to be postmarked on the day, April 7th, that it actually took place?
Okay, don't give the answer yet, because I don't even know what they said. Okay, so I'm just going to give my guess, or what I think should happen. So this would be assuming that everyone already has their ballot. They just get an extra week to postmark it.
And that's part of the problem. The claim was that because of the overload, not at least 100,000 ballots had not gotten to people in the mail at this point.
Okay.
That's at least the claim that was made before the court. Yeah.
Okay. I think the right thing to do in a time of chaos, uncertainty, and grace is to give everybody 1 extra week. I think that's fair and fine. First, I want to ask your opinion, and then you tell us what the Supreme Court did.
Okay. I've struggled with this a lot too because of, I think, the competing ideas, and we can maybe get into what the competing claims were for the two sides. I would tend to think that the downside of possible election fraud and other things probably should leave it to mail them in on the postmark date and probably not grant the reprieve, but I think it's a really hard decision. And I also think a primary might be a different question than a general election on that count as well.
How so? Well, how would that calculus change for you? General?
Because at least a primary is determining the nominee for an office, not the officer himself. Whereas in November, and I guess this does change because in the fact that Wisconsin was selecting some seats, but at least as far as the Democratic primary, you're not selecting the president of the United States. You're selecting who you want to be the nominee for it.
Sure. So the general election, you would be more. No, you got to vote on the day. Or you would give more grace.
I think a little more grace. What I think, by the way, that all states need to be thinking about in case this resurges in the fall is what do you do to make sure this doesn't happen? Because it's a choice between two bad options, in my opinion. That's why I think I completely respect where you're coming from. I would almost have to flip a coin without thinking about it even more than I have, because I think there are two values here. And I think the way the votes went down on the Supreme Court fell along these values. On one hand, there's a lot of chance for extra fraud if you give extra time, if you have all this confusion, and that undermines the election process. On the other hand, there's a lot of questions if a lot of people that tried to vote didn't get to vote and didn't, by any fault of their own, fall through the cracks. That is a huge problem for democracy as well. You're kind of caught between two values that you need to respect. As many people as rightly can vote should, and you shouldn't allow election fraud. And that was, I think, the rock in a hard place that the Supreme Court was put between.
Now, what's interesting, and I want to ask you to give us the results, but what I find interesting about the results, because I lied, I do know one thing. I know it was a 5-4 party line, which is weird. Usually if something's party line, I don't know if that's the right word, but whatever. You don't think that's weird because it makes sense, right? People have very different ideological.
Yeah.
But in this, it's odd. There you go. Yeah, there you go. This one, it's kind of weird that it was nominee party line because, as you said, you can see both sides. You'd think it'd be a little more of a toss-up for everybody, and it would kind of be a different scattered result. But what did they ended up saying?
Yeah, and I think I can explain the partisan divide beyond just politics. The divide was the 5 Republican nominees voted to say that they do have to go forward, that they have to be postmarked by the day of the election, and the dissenters were the 4 Democrat nominees. And where I think that you see some consistency here, because a lot of people are crying, well, this helps the party of their nominee, right? This will help Republicans and the other way would have helped Democrats. I don't think that's purely what's going on. If you go back to Bush v. Gore and the debate over the hanging chads in the Florida election process, I think you see some consistency between the Democratic and Republican parties. Republicans are more concerned, and I think it's legitimate that they're concerned about this, about making sure the process is fair in the sense of no fraud. No stuffing the ballot box, and they understand that mail-in, especially last minute, is harder to protect in that. The Democratic Party in the Florida vote wanted to count a lot more votes, not just because they thought it would help Gore, but I think they genuinely believe that the legitimacy lay in the more people that voted, the better, and the more people whose votes can count, the better. By the way, I don't think either is inherently wrong. I think both really matter, and it's really a matter of how do you respect both the best way possible, because both are critical to our democracy. We need to not shut out rightful voters. We need to not allow fraud that makes dead people voting, as sometimes has happened in our history.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The ideological, like where your ideology comes down on each of those two very equally important things. Wow, that's something. Okay, let me wrap up with this. So I guess the conclusion of that story is they voted and they did not extend the week.
Correct. And maybe I should add the court had already extended when you could request ballots from, I believe, the 2nd to the 3rd. And then they said you could mail them out by the 7th. So they did extend a little bit of grace, but
Okay.
again, there are people that probably didn't get to vote because of this. So that's why I think your opinion is very legitimate. It's a very hard call to make as far as what's the right line to divide. And that's why I would say the best thing to do is plan for November in a way that this situation doesn't come up where we have to sacrifice at least one of those values for the other.
Yes, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about in 1 minute, what this could look like for November. Like, let's say this thing rises back up again. What authority, does the president or the Congress have to delay voting, postpone it for 6 months? Wow, like what chaos does that look like?
That would be a massive problem. Also, constitutionally, states can set their primaries in their own elections. The Constitution states when federal elections are supposed to happen, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So I would say that's a kind of constitutional crisis of legitimacy we don't want to have. They need to be right now planning, how do we do mail-in voting or some other thing that protects the integrity of the process and allows people to vote, because that's just something that we don't want to think about, because it's an even hard. It accentuates the problem Wisconsin had to a constitutional level, not just a state law level.
Ooh, man, that's ugly. Okay, yeah, all right. Maybe we'll cross that bridge. Or if we need to, then obviously we'll talk more about it. Adam Carrington, Hillsdale College. Always a pleasure, Adam. Appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. Hope everyone stays safe out there.
Yes, you too. Thank you, Professor. All right, we'll come back. We'll wrap up. I want to talk a little bit about the models, but the big question is, when are we going to get back to normal? And no one knows, but we'll talk about that a bit next. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So how much longer are we're gonna do this? Oh man, it's like there's so much uncertainty. I don't even know if we've increased uncertainty about anything. Mask, no mask, how does this thing really transmit? How far does it transmit? I think weeks have gone by. I don't know if we've learned anything really. Like HCQ, might be a thing that helped, maybe not. I don't know. No one knows. But how long is this going to last? Kudlow says the White House is expecting to reopen the economy. I think we joked about this yesterday. Like, what the heck does that sentence mean? Reopen the economy? Like, I understand, I've asked before, so when are we going to reopen the bank, right? Because it's Sunday or something. Or let's say, your favorite restaurant has a fire, and you're like, oh, when are you guys going to reopen? But I've never thought, when are we going to reopen the economy? 4 to 8 weeks. England said there's no chance that they're going to lift their original 3-week shutdown. Their prime minister, because their acting prime minister, because Boris Johnson's still in intensive care, said there's no way they're going to take their foot off the pedal. So they're not ending anytime soon. My brother lives in England. They're not ending anytime soon. But then I read that their schools are going to plan to reopen after Easter, which is next week. So they don't even know what they're doing. Austria, we talked about Austria the other day. They're the first European country with a plan. Monday, small shops are going to reopen. And then May 1st, larger stores are going to be allowed to reopen. And then restaurants, hotels, and schools, they say they're going to reopen in the middle of May. And then public events back in July. I don't know, maybe. That's a really long way away. Who knows what's going to happen since then? I mean, we've already seen rates in Singapore and Hong Kong, South Korea perhaps, spike back up again after they beat it recently. Ezekiel Emanuel, he says, oh, no, 18 months. Forget it. I was like, what are you talking about, 18 months? Of what? I read an article yesterday for the first time, and I saw people talking about 2022. I saw that date. For literally the first time in my life, I saw the date 2022, which still it seems like 40 years away. So I don't get it. And so some of these models, and we're not even going to talk about models today, but some of the models say that the peak is coming soon, right? And you look at that and you're like, okay, that's good, but does that even matter? Does it matter when the peak is? When it comes to peak matters because that's the max number of deaths for this hump, right? So like in that sense it matters. But does it matter at all for when we're going to get back to normal? I don't think so, because let's say we go past the peak, nothing's fundamentally changed with the virus or our ability to get it and spread it. So if only a small number of people have ever had it and got the antibodies, and we're going to assume that you're immune for years, which is a big assumption, because there may be no immunity. We have no idea. SARS, another coronavirus, you only have immunity for 2, maybe 3 years. So nothing's fundamentally changed. Like, could you still go back to real life until there's a really good treatment or a vaccine, which is going to take years, as we know, if ever? So the peak, when you're wondering when we're going to get back to normal, the peak doesn't even really matter. COVID could still keep us locked up inside and shut down until there's a vaccine. Or we do this like namsy-pamsy, like some a little bit there, but like no full return. J.D. Vance wrote this really good long thread about a bunch of different things, kind of critiques that conservatives are making. It was really good. But one critique was that conservatives are making, especially a lot of conservatives, about we got to get back, we got to open up the economy. It's the most important thing. And listen, I get it. But JD says one big problem with this argument is it overstates how much of the lockdown comes from policymakers. And he looked at England. So Bloomberg wrote this piece some date, I forget, March like 17th or something, and said, hey, everyone, business is as usual in England. This is terrible. There's no lockdown in England. But that same day, restaurant traffic was down 89%. And that was before the UK government shut down restaurants. So in other words, a lot of this shutdown and social distancing is very organic, and it doesn't matter what the politicians do. And Bill Gates had a statement like this the other day. He's like, listen, we can open things back up, which would increase the supply of the economy, but people's psyches are different, and the demand may not be there. So you can open things up, but the question is, are people going to go places again? So this is a question for you. Ask amongst yourselves and your family. All right, let's say tomorrow the president says no more lockdown. You can do whatever you want. You can fly wherever you want. Everything's back open. Would you? Would you go to your local restaurant? Would you go to church? Would you go to your friend's house? Would you go to a kid's birthday party? I think we're so focused on what the president tells us we can or can't do. But the real question is, what would you do? And more importantly, what do you think most people would do? We could put everyone back to work, but will the demand still be there or ever be there again? Until we have some real fundamental changes with the virus. Something to think about. Slater Series tomorrow. We got our special, Coronavirus, America at War. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word.